Before we start the podcast, just to let you know that Steph will have an update for you at the end. Since we recorded, the International Criminal Court's Office of the Prosecutor has come out with a new DCC, meaning a document containing the charges. And our very own Stephopedia is reading it right now to update you at the end of the show. Enjoy.
If you are a victim and you see that, and they tell you that Duterte will soon be released, Duterte has been released, or that Duterte, the case against Duterte is weak and you're a victim, you would fear.
No one can act with impunity.
These are crimes that are beyond the pale.
We are talking about human beings. We're not talking about numbers.
We need a court. That's as simple as that.
This is Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg. This episode was produced in partnership with justiceinfo.net.
All rise.
Hi, Janet.
Hi, Steph.
This was going to be a preview to the confirmation of charges hearing for former Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte.
Yeah, but they postponed because his lawyers, including the redoubtable Nick Kaufman, have been arguing that the 80-year-old president is unfit to stand trial. Would you like to kick us off by filling in some of those details, Steph?
Yeah, well, this is, of course, a tried and tested strategy for people who are representing elderly dictators to say that they're unfit for trial on health grounds. And before, we didn't quite know what this was, but in documents released on September 11th, we could see for the first time what health issues they are claiming. And the defense says he suffers from cognitive decline, which they say is messing with his memory, his executive functions, and even orientation of where he is and with whom he is. And they say that this limits his critical thinking to the point where he cannot meaningfully participate in his own defense.
So the question is, what happens now? Maybe we can draw on some of the previous examples we have of other international courts of when this has been argued.
The judge has already said that they're going to have some kind of medical assessment, and we're going to wait for that. We don't have a timeline for that, but we've seen this before in international courts, of course, and there's kind of two examples in recent years. In The Hague, there was Bosnian Serb General Ratko Mladic, who was found to suffer from cognitive decline, but not so much that he couldn't actually participate in his defense. And their judges decided that he didn't need to be like 100% of what he was as long as he could still participate. So his trial continued with like longer breaks and shorter sitting hours. On the other hand, we have the former Rwandan business tycoon Felicien Kabuga, an alleged génocidaire. He was found wholly unfit to stand trial because he suffered from dementia, but he was not released. In fact, he is still in the UN Detention Center in The Hague, waiting to see what happens to him, mostly because no other country will take him.
Yeah, I think those are really interesting examples, and I'm sure we should do at some point something about aging defendants and exactly how courts deal with them. Maybe we can pick that up in the next couple of months. But let's just focus now on Duterte. If you don't mind, Steph, can I kind of pull out of your brain a bit of an overview of how we got here? I mean, who Duterte is, what he's been charged with. I mean, let's start off with, how did we get this case? Because the Philippines isn't a member of the ICC anymore.
It's not a member anymore, but it was at the time that Duterte was president and that he began his so-called war on drugs, which is one of the things he is charged with, murders related to this period of this war on drugs, where Filipino police and authorities harassed thousands and killed at least hundreds of people alleged to have been drug dealers or drug addicts. At the time that this war on drugs was going on, there was a lot of complaining and reporting about it, and a lot of activists pushed to get this case to the ICC. So the former prosecutor Fatou Bensouda opened a preliminary examination, and that was already, I think, enough to anger the then President Duterte to say that he would withdraw the Philippines from the ICC. But as we've known from other cases, what happens when you withdraw from the ICC is that you stay on for a year. So you have to first formally withdraw, and then it takes a year to take effect. That all happened, but the ICC continued to investigate and then said, well, we had this case, and it's about crimes that were going on when we still had jurisdiction jurisdiction. So now we're going to open a full investigation, and that is actually going to lead to charges. Now, there is some legal debate, which we have preliminary rulings from the judges that yes, having a preliminary examination is apparently the same as having an active investigation, and yes, you could charge them. But I'm sure that's going to be relitigated with Kaufman, because he's going to relitigate everything.
We should also look at what exactly he's been charged with and how he got here. But should we shelve those for the moment until we get into our guest?
Yes, because he can say much more about the political intricacies around how he got here. And our guest is Benjie Aquino, who is a legal assistant for the NGO Redress, who deals with the Philippines and knows a lot also about the Filipino victims. Hi, Benjie.
Hi, Janet and Stephanie. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here. I mean, it's always really important, I think, to us to try to understand some of the perspectives of victims in a case, because they play very different roles in the court. Steph, I mean, I don't know Benjie. How do you know him?
Well, I ran into him and I spoke to him at an event around Duterte's initial hearing. When they are handed over, they always have to have this initial appearance before the court. And he spoke about the victims in the Philippines and how there is this campaign of misinformation and harassment directed against the victims, and how Redress and other NGOs are trying to combat it. And I thought this is really interesting. Here is also a person who is talking to people on the ground and can tell us more about that. So I invited him here.
So why don't we kick off, Benjie, ask you about misinformation and disinformation, and what's the picture in the Philippines at the moment?
Yeah, in talking about misinformation and disinformation, we sort of have to go back to how Duterte was elected in the first place, because that's when it sort of started. There are various journalists that would call the Philippines the ground zero or the patient zero for the disinformation campaigns. Essentially, Duterte was a longtime mayor of a city in the Philippines, in the southern Philippines, Davao, where he was already doing this kind of killing suspected drug users under the assumption that drug use equals criminality. Therefore, killing drug users would also end criminality. Of course, we know that's wrong, but that has been his style. And during the presidential elections that launched Duterte into the presidency, there was already a lot of disinformation and misinformation happening online. It was being done through trolls. It was being done through vloggers. It was being done through influencers. And you see so much of that fake information online, you think it's true because that's all you ever see. I think there are two main reasons that Duterte was launched into the presidency. First is the disinformation around what he is and what he has done. And second, and the thing that scares me as well, is that he has not lied about wanting to kill drug users. In fact, it was one of his campaign promises that he would continue what he has done in Davao, only in a nationwide scale. And people bought that. And so he became president. And throughout his term, it was disinformation all throughout. Whenever any issues come up, trolls would create news that would make it seem as if he's doing the right thing.
I understand you're saying about how the background about Duterte and how in this Philippines information environment this has worked, but how specifically in relation to the ICC and the victims now has this worked? Are they still being subjected to the same kind of trolling, the same kind of alternative facts, let's say, that makes it difficult for them to understand what's happening?
Exactly. Yeah. So that same style of disinformation that launched him into the presidency is still what's being used to control the narrative in relation to the case in the ICC. Particularly, victims are being vilified. People would harass them online. We don't know if they're trolls. Many of them would be. There would be fake news about the substance of the case at the ICC. And of course, if you are a victim and you see that, and they tell you that Duterte will soon be released, Duterte has been released, or that the case against Duterte is weak and you're a victim, you would fear you would be scared for your life, and you start to rethink whether or not you would participate because it wouldn't go anywhere. You start to rethink whether it would be worth it giving your documents or even volunteering as a witness if the case wouldn't go anywhere. And so disinformation and misinformation has affected participation of the victims in that regard.
I thought that was so incredibly interesting when I heard Benjie speak, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast, because it also really taps into the fact that the ICC is this complicated, big institution outside of affected countries, and that is not often very clear. And that indeed, if you can convince people that this case is weak or he's going to be out in like a matter of weeks, then if you are in Manila, in your house, how great are you going to feel about handing over all your information or your documents or being named as a victim or somebody who participates or even being interviewed about it, or having ICC people coming to your house to interview you?
I agree with you, Steph. This is fascinating to try and consider from that point of view. Let's also, though, before we go any further, make sure that we are all on the same page. As the legal assistant, I'm sure you're on top of all the details, Benjie. What exactly is Duterte? Is it to do with his time as mayor or his time as president? How many people are we talking about? Steph mentioned thousands, maybe hundreds. What are the details we need to know?
Yeah, so Duterte in his arrest warrant, it mentioned crimes against humanity of murder, particularly listing down 19 people that were killed in the city of Davao.
I remember that. It's just 19 people. I remember picking that out when I was writing about it, thinking, come on.
Yeah, and that has been the subject of disinformation. So it says 19 people in relation to the killings in Davao, which I told you he was a mayor, and 24 people in relation to killings nationwide. So a total of 43 killings alone. That is what's in the warrant. I think the prosecutor tried to charge at least 2 other crimes, including the crimes against humanity of murder, but that was not included. And this is one of the hooks for disinformation again. Of course, when that came out, it was used to say that the CSOs who claim that there have been thousands of killing, it was used to say that they're not telling the truth. The ICC says there have only been 43. But now you say there's 30,000. Who's saying the truth? Now we don't know who's saying the truth. The court cannot be trusted. The CSOs cannot be trusted. And that's all you hear online.
And CSOs are civil society organizations. Those people are active in the Philippines. Also, what I remember is how he was transferred. I mean, for me, again, from the outside, it looked like 2 families at war in the Philippines, and the old granddad gets shoved onto a plane, and the ICC is just the kind of the useful space to get rid of him. Tell us the truth. What's really been going on?
Unfortunately, that is true. We hear people say that this has just all been a product of political ambitions and making sure that one powerful family is excluded from the next elections or power in general. And unfortunately, that is true. I have to give that my honest opinion and assessment of that. These 2 families, the Marcos family, we would say, who is currently the president, and the Duterte family, with Duterte being the former president and his daughter being the current vice president, Marcos and the daughter, Duterte, they ran together, but then fighting broke out and maybe their alliance just shattered. And so the Dutertes remain extremely popular in the Philippines. And civil society organizations would agree with me when I say that his arrest may be motivated by the fact that they wanted to exclude Duterte from whatever politics is going on in the Philippines. But that isn't to say that Duterte did not deserve to be here, right?
No, I mean, that's always the thing, right? And he says that he's abducted and, it's illegal the way he got here, which, this has been litigated in other cases before the ICC with people literally being abducted. The jurisprudence on that is it doesn't really matter to the judges how you got there. If you got there and they have jurisdiction and they think there's reasonable grounds that you've committed these crimes, then you're staying there. So Even though that may sound wildly unfair to people on the ground, that is just the way it works. Just the fact that you got there in a maybe questionable way doesn't really mean that the court can't act. And I think there is also the thing that we see when kind of people who are losing their popularity get transferred to these international criminal tribunals. You have this whole new narrative that they can start up as being the savior of their peoples and defending the honor of, say, country X. So we've seen this in the former Yugoslavia. That was the classic go-to. You see it now at the Kosovo court with Hague. It is also a way to reinvent yourself and to be on TV, even if you are in the dock. But when we had the initial appearance, we were waiting for a kind of combative Duterte, because we saw him, I think it was like 1 or 2 days before he was transferred. He had a political rally in Hong Kong where he was very hyped up. And at the confirmation of charges hearing, he was in a room seemingly falling asleep and looking every inch the very fragile old man. How real is it? Is the super dynamic politician the real? Is the very elderly grandfather? Are we somewhere in between and he decides to play up what he wants? Because 80 is old, and apparently, according to the defense statements, there are some reports that we don't know the exact content of that do kind of say there's something maybe going on. We just don't know what.
Yes, Steph, that is correct. When he was arrested, I think he was in Hong Kong with the overseas Filipino workers there. He was very energetic. And then he was transferred to the Philippines. They tried to get an injunction. They weren't so successful. And they then flew to Dubai for a layover and then to Rotterdam. In those few hours, from a very energetic Duterte in Hong Kong to when he appeared in the court for his initial appearance, I don't believe that he weakened so much in that period. Before he got arrested, he even made a statement about if the ICC arrests me, there will be a shootout, or they'll have to kill him for him to be arrested. Those will not be words of a weak man. But then again, and you've said it yourself, this is not the first time we are seeing this kind of tactic from the defense or from those who are being accused of these crimes once they get arrested. To be honest, I'm not trained in medical science. I'm not a doctor, and I will leave that to the experts. But I think that knowing how politicians in the Philippines would respond to cases being filed against them, this is not new. And this can just be all an act. But I am excited to know about what the medical experts would say about his fitness to stand trial.
And how are victims actually taking the delay? What are people saying? Because I, for example, have booked my ticket, ready to be here, and so on and so on. But were people all excited and wanting to hear some of the details? And now they rather worried?
Yes, the victims have been anxious since the arrest of Duterte. And again, that was compounded by the fact that so much misinformation is being released, and they're taking that all in. So when they heard of the postponement, they got even more anxious, and they start to ask, why is there a postponement? Given the fact that the jurisdiction is still being attacked and has not yet been decided on, given the fact that there's an interim release request that has not been decided on and has been put on hold, they start to question why would they postpone the hearing? And this again has been used as a hook by the trolls through disinformation, saying that, oh, it's being postponed because his interim release is being processed. Oh, it's being postponed because the judges may be deciding that they might not have jurisdiction over the case. And it's being capitalized on by whoever is creating this disinformation to feed more anxiety into the victims themselves. It has not been helpful. This delay and postponement, and also without a date yet, has not been helpful. Civil society organizations have also booked their tickets to be here to watch it live. And I think a few of them will push through to meet with organs of the court, but many of them will no longer be pushing through. And this puts a dent into the resources of civil society organizations. They do not usually book tickets that are flexible or cancelable.
Before we kind of turn and more about the disinformation and how the court deals with it and how you can counter it, I wanted to ask, what is the wildest fake news that you've heard related to Duterte and the ICC case? Because we all think that we know kind of what it is, but I'm sure there's things that we can't even conceive with what people come up with. So I'm curious to see if you have anything where you were just like, well, this is just...
Well, they can get very creative. I think the fake news that got my attention the most was that if Sara Duterte were to be elected president,
that's Duterte's daughter.
Duterte's daughter, currently the vice president. If Sara Duterte were to be elected president, she will have the power to stop the case and bring Duterte back home. And so it has so many layers. First is they might be setting her up for the presidency. For those who want Duterte back home, elect my daughter so that I could go back home. Second is that they are attacking the credibility of the court as a political institution. That it's not just your regular judiciary. People can talk that to them to drop cases. And so I think this is the craziest one, but also people are buying it, unfortunately.
What worries me is whether this court is actually able to deal with disinfo. Because I've been in the Philippines and I know what a lively social media environment it is. I know how, you have thousands of people online now. Can the court actually do anything?
That is true. The Filipinos are very much online. In fact, there have been studies that say that Filipinos spend the most time online in the whole world. As to whether or not the court is able to handle these disinformation campaigns, I'm afraid with the resources they have, I do not think so. Of course, with just the court alone, it might not be enough, but civil society organizations are also coordinating and working on fighting this disinformation. In fact, Redress, in collaboration with Philippine CSOs, we have released a Q&A that would tackle the most popular sources of disinformation, and that's available online through the Redress website. And it's been made available in Filipino or Tagalog, as well as in Bisaya or Cebuano, the languages that most of the victims would speak. But I would say that you are fighting against disinformation campaign, a well-oiled, well-funded one, versus what the resources, what the court would have in terms of its resources scattered across all other situations and cases.
But that's from the NGO side. Should the ICC not be, they have quite a budget of millions of euros every year. And I know they're always wanting more money, but, as journalists, we also know the communication strategy, the court is not always on point in our side. How is it with the outreach to victims in the Philippines, do you think?
I may not be 100% aware of what they're doing, but I know that they are in touch with Philippine CSOs who are directly in touch with victim groups in the Philippines, and that is how outreach is being done. So what I understand it is, you are fighting misinformation and disinformation that's happening massively online through on-ground conversations. They may convene the victims and give them information directly. They tell the CSOs, if there is fake news that you see online, contact us directly and we'll tell you, and maybe you can relay this to the victims.
I suppose overall we do wonder whether the court has the ability really to keep people safe if they're feeling really intimidated. I mean, beyond the general misinformation, that some of these victims may be worrying for their own individual safety. Are you aware whether they're actually supporting people?
So with my knowledge of the protection program of the ICC, it might not be available at this stage right now, especially to the general victims if they are experiencing hate speech online or if they're being intimidated by their own neighbors or their family members, because that is happening. They are being harassed online. Even their own family members are blaming them for Duterte's arrest. Even their community members. One of the most outspoken victims received a threat through text, and she didn't leave her house for 4 days. I'm afraid there aren't programs to protect them yet, at least from the court. But from the CSO side, who are closer to the victims, they might be better able and better placed to respond to these threats. But again, resources are limited. So the most they can do is give them a shelter for a few days, maybe. But yeah, this is also a big issue, the intimidation and the direct vilification of the victims being to blame for why Duterte is here. It goes into their protection or safety and security issues, but also their participation. If they keep getting vilified like this, how will they want to continue participating?
This is the kind of social media climate, but what is the political climate at the moment? You said that there's this misinformation that may be used to push his daughter, who's now the vice president, into the presidency with the idea that she could get Duterte off. It was this rift in the families that provided this opportunity for him to be extradited to the court. Is the general political situation now in favor of this ICC case against Duterte and in favor of the court? Would they cooperate? Or should we not expect that? And is he just a pawn in a political game who's handy to be out of the way in the Hague prison, but they don't actually want to like a comprehensive case against him?
My reading of this is that it is in a way mixed. On one hand, there is this recent news that certain police officials in the Philippines who were once under Duterte have agreed to testify against him as a witness. And the Ministry of Justice in the Philippines was aware of this. In fact, this potential witness met with the International Criminal Court outside the country, and the Ministry of Justice was aware of that. And that tells me that maybe there is a degree of cooperation. However, there are also statements from the administration that they will say that they're no longer parties to the Rome Statute and that they're not obliged to cooperate. I would say that in terms of the political situation, popularity of the Dutertes, they're still very popular. In fact, their popularity skyrocketed because of this arrest. There was a time when the daughter, Sara Duterte, the current vice president, was supposed to be facing impeachment complaints, but that was thrown out by the Philippine Supreme Court in a unanimous decision. So all these things that are happening politically, locally, would tell me that it's quite mixed. Of course, the Dutertes would still have their allies in the Senate, in the Congress, and they delayed the impeachment proceedings for so long until the Philippine Supreme Court ruled on it and threw it away. So I lost track of the question.
That's okay. It's clear that it's a mixed bag. Then there's the other, the thing that tacks onto that is that we know that his defense is trying to get him provisionally released. All these countries that they're trying to get him released to are always redacted. I assume that the ICC is usually not very willing to send somebody to a country for provisional release that is not a member of the ICC, because then, of course, you cannot force them to come back. But would the Philippines even take Duterte back in the current political climate, do you think?
I don't think they would want to do that. I don't think the Marcos administration would want to do that. They did this particularly to keep him out of the country. And his return might cause complications in the politics, but also it might not look very good because he was sent here or surrendered here in the first place, and then they come back. But also from the perspective of the victims, that is not going to look good. They're already very anxious about the power of Duterte remaining even while he is in The Hague with limited contact from the detention center. What more if he's in the Philippines? I think it will cause the victims to fear for their lives even more than they do now.
Just to say that if you are enjoying this podcast and you'd like to give us a bit of extra support, you can head over to our Support Us page where you can give us a tip, or you can follow us on Patreon and you can download our newsletter. And we really appreciate everybody who gives us a bit of extra support there.
Well, I think this is a lot of background, and thank you so much for laying this out. We're going to wrap this up, but not before we do our asymmetrical haircuts questions. And one of them is always, did we not ask you something or a certain aspect of this case that you do want to tell us about? This is your chance.
Two things. First is, in terms of accountability mechanisms locally in the Philippines, it has not been moving so much as well. We had a recent conviction of a police colonel who shot a suspected drug user. And of course, I say suspected drug user because that's always their narrative and it's not always true. Who shot a suspected drug user at an operation who was killed. It was over a decade, I think, of this case, or almost a decade, and we finally got a conviction. But those wins are isolated cases. It's still not very much, the victims do not always necessarily win, or victims are still not encouraged to file cases locally. The second thing is that I think it's important to also mention that even though the case is focusing on the crimes against humanity of murder, that there are a lot more violations that happened. We had cases of torture, we had cases of illegal detention, we even had cases of sexual violence. And when I was still working in the Philippines, we were able to talk to some victims and witnesses who say that they were gang raped in front of their husbands because the police would want to arrest their husbands on the basis of fake drug charges. And the wives would try to stop that from happening. And the police would say, okay, we will not arrest him if you engage in sexual intercourse with us. And these cases do not get talked about, and they are unaware if they will ever get to participate, if this court is really for them, or is it just for those who were murdered and killed. And maybe just one last thing to clarify, when I said that I may not be 100% aware of what the court is doing, because I know that they can also go directly to the Philippine CSOs who we're not already coordinating with. So not to speak ill of the court, but it's more of, I want to say that maybe they're doing more than what I have been involved in, or than what I can see.
I know you can't badmouth the court. My dissing of the court in this was more that you have this massive online disinformation campaign. And if you're not seeing a kind of pushback from the court on that, then that is telling. So indeed, we don't know what the court does behind the scenes. I have tried to throw Janet under the bus by suggesting a new asymmetrical haircuts question. We were asking people what their favorite court case was, but I thought...
But we kept on getting Nicaragua at the ICJ. So,
yes.
Or Tadic.
And the Lotus or Tadic. So
yeah.
I decided to maybe do a new question, which we're road testing today. And I was going to ask about the strangest job you've ever had. And I will kick this off by telling you that my strangest job in my student days was literally, as my husband likes to joke, making Christmas cards with the mentally ill, which is the lyrics from a Smith song, because I did a stint where I had to put special issue stamps on cards that went out to collectors. And I did that with people with Down syndrome who were doing that as a work kind of placement. So that was the oddest job I've ever had.
I don't know if I can match that. I can just say I spent one summer digging potatoes because somebody had to do it and I did get paid for it.
In the Philippines, it might not be as common to have part-time jobs when you're growing up, but I remember, and this is very cultural also in the Philippines growing up, and my grandmother would ask me to pull out hairs from her armpit.
Okay.
And she would give me like a peso per hair.
I was going to say, at least tell me you were paid for this.
Yeah, I was. But it was like, yeah. And Many children went through that. That is a very cultural thing in the Philippines.
Fascinating. I've been through threading in Asia. I mean, that's how you usually get hairs pulled out, is somebody ties a thread around and then pulls it out. But I have never employed a young child to remove my hair.
Well, maybe if you get to like grandmother age and you have grandchildren, you can employ this tactic.
Okay, in the future. Our very last question, Benjie, is always, is there anything that you would like to recommend in terms of reading or watching or listening to? It can be either connected to what we've been talking about or something that you use to get away from this field.
I think in terms of knowing more about the Philippine situation, of course, I would advise people to check their sources. Stephanie and Janet, I've met people from The Hague, sometimes even from the institutions that are close to the court, who have been also reading fake news, and that is extremely scary. That even in The Hague, it reaches. So check your sources. CSOs are doing their best to put out information out there. Redress also has published a Q&A on that disinformation.
And what do you do when you're not doing this job? What do you listen to? Do you have anything in your Netflix queue that you want to watch when you want to stop thinking about crazy disinformation? Or are you watching all these documentaries about disinformation and catfishing to get more background information? I don't know.
No, in my free time, I really wanted to be free, from all this high stress kind of work. And I do watch a lot of Netflix. But music is my main go-to recreation way to break free from all this. And I like listening to a lot of Broadway music and musicals. And I would go sometimes to a play. Just recently, I went to Amsterdam to watch Hadestown. It was amazing. It was in English, one of the very few plays I could watch. The actors were all amazing. The storyline was, of course, it was based on mythology, but the music was really engaging.
Oh, wonderful! We'll put a link to Hadestown in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking your time, even while you were feeling a little under the weather, to come talk to us about all the ins and outs of the Philippines. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Jad. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Benjie. So this week, the Office of the Prosecutor has filed a new DCC, or a document containing the charges against Duterte. As we talked about in the podcast, some victims had been concerned to know whether or not what happened to them, namely allegations of torture, illegal detention, and sexual violence, would be included. Now we know that the focus of the prosecution is very much on murder in a variety of forms, but they do also mention torture. They just haven't charged it separately. We have to also remind you that in a confirmation of charges hearing, the judges can either confirm the charges, as it says on the tin, or not, or change the charges or drop some and confirm others. Also good to know is that the standard of proof for confirmation of charges is reasonable grounds to believe, and not the full beyond a reasonable doubt standard needed for the court case. As always, we still have a very long way to go, and we don't know yet whether this case will even come to trial, because we're also waiting to see if the defense is successful in its submission to try and get Duterte declared unfit to stand trial. So, lots of things to keep an eye on. I'm sure we'll come with more updates, but that's it for now.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast. Created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie Vandenberg, in partnership with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by Autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.